The Slow Italian Campaign. (1943).
The Allies expect to take Rome before the end of the year. But Hitler is determined to not make it easy for them and orders Kesselring to strengthen the Gustav Line to block the enemy's path to the Italian capital while they await the arrival of reinforcements under Rommel. The Allied advance must be stopped at all costs. The Gustav Line, which crosses the Abruzini Hills, does not include the summits of Monte Cassino or Monte Sammucro, as the Germans consider these strategic points to be very exposed to enemy fire. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring wants to avoid the destruction of the Monte Cassino monastery and its valuable historical relics. He therefore orders all the works of art to be removed to Rome and placed under the protection of the Vatican. While the Germans install observation posts on the hillside and in the surrounding area, all the Benedictine monks are evacuated, except for 5 who have decided to stay with the 82-year-old abbot Gregorio di Amare. In their progress to the north, the Allies encounter more and more stiff resistance as the withdrawing German forces organize an effective rear guard action. Behind them, groups of engineers are putting the finishing touches to the strong defensive lines, which are made more formidable by the difficult terrain. The only advantage enjoyed by the British and Americans is air superiority, but by mid-November, rain and even snow reduce this greatly. The armored cars sink in the mud, and the Gustav Line is still a long way off. General Sir Harold Alexander, Supreme Commander in the Mediterranean, decides to give his men a rest, as the fighting has been exhausting. The Eternal City is still 150 kilometers away. Having analyzed the situation, the Allied commanders decide the place to break through the German line is in the area of Cassino. It dominates entry to the best route to Rome, the Via Casalina, which runs along the Liri Valley. The Germans, finding shelter in natural and artificial caves, concentrate their highly mobile mortar batteries in deep ravines behind Monte Cassino, and all over the hill they have well-protected machine gun nests. Its slopes have been covered with barbed wire, and thousands of mines have been laid. At the summit, the historical monastery, where Saint Benedict founded the Benedictine order in the 6th century, rises up in all its majesty. Kesselring, whose love of art and history has to be acknowledged, knows that if the Allies destroy this place during the assault, they will deeply offend many Christians. Besides the Gustav Line, the Germans have established others running parallel to it. The Reinhardt or Bernhardt Line, which stretches from the Tyrrhenian Sea to the River Sangro. The Hitler Line, which links Pontecorvo with Aquino and San Germano, and the Roman Line around the capital. Therefore, with their positions fortified in all the defensive strips and around Monte Cassino, the 10 German divisions are ready to prevent the Allied advance in Italy, which, if successful, could put at risk the Romanian oil fields, a vital artery of the Third Reich. Against them are a total of 21 divisions, composed of soldiers from many different countries, with the support of the Italian resistance in the form of the partisans of the Lazio region, led by the communist Enrico Gianetti. The common objective? To break the Gustav Line and cross the Liri Valley in order to reach Rome. (1944). Following the landings at Salerno, the Allied High Command is worried about the slow advance of its troops on the Italian peninsula. The strong German resistance convinces Eisenhower it will cost many lives to reach Rome. In October 1943, the commander-in-chief drew up a plan to carry out a new amphibious operation to the north of the Gustav Line, in an area closer to the capital, with the aim of opening another front in support of the forces fighting in Italy. The place chosen for the landings was the coast of Anzio and Nettuno, 50 kilometers to the south of the Eternal City. Before this, Allied troops would attack the Gustav Line around Monte Cassino and, once the German 10th Army was defeated, would meet up with those landing at Anzio to march on Rome and clear Italy of the Germans. But one of the big problems facing the Allied army is the lack of supplies, as the great efforts being made to carry out the Normandy landings absorb almost all their productive capacity. New operations at Anzio cannot be undertaken after February, because in May, Eisenhower and the majority of the Allied commanders will have to dedicate all their energies to the invasion of the north of France. The date chosen for the new landings on the Italian coast is January 22nd, 1944. In Rome, the commander of the German forces in Italy, Field Marshal Kesselring, has been forced to strengthen all the lines of defensive and does not have enough men to hold back new waves of Marines. On the 17th of January, according to plan, Allied troops launched the first of their attacks on Cassino, but are met by strong resistance from troops under Heinrich von Vietinghoff. The Allies launch a frontal attack against the Gustav Line across the river Garigliano and take up positions in the Ariunci Mountains. In response, von Vietinghoff sends 2 armored divisions to the scene. On the 20th, the Americans tried to advance to the Liri Valley across the river Rapido, but the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division inflicts heavy casualties on them and forces them to retreat. On the 21st, 40,000 men from the United States and British armies embark in the port of Naples for the coasts of Anzio, 90 miles to the north. On the 22nd of January, Operation Shingle begins. The British, with the 46th Tank Regiment, disembark 10 kilometers to the north of Anzio. The U.S. 3rd Division lands on the beaches to the east of the city. The Rangers and paratroopers are given the task of taking its port. To the surprise of the troops, upon opening the landing craft doors, they find no resistance. They advance silently on the lonely beaches and take up positions. Further north, Allied planes attack bridges, roads, and railways. The troops capture Anzio and Nettuno, but though their path seems to be clear, they surprisingly receive the order to halt their advance. Kesselring, far from the scene, reacts quickly. 3 hours after the invasion, the 4th Paratrooper Division and the Hermann Göring Division are on their way back to block the Allies' path to Rome, with an enveloping movement which the Luftwaffe is to finish off. At the same time, Hitler orders troops to be transferred to Italy from Yugoslavia, Germany, and France, together with the 3rd Panzer Division. Following the incomprehensible halt, the Americans and British resume their march to extend the beachheads in the direction of Campoleone and Cisterna. In front of them are the Alban Hills, behind which stands Rome. On the 24th of January, taking advantage of the movements of the German armored vehicles, the Americans attack Cassino and are able to establish bridgeheads on the river Rapido for the tanks to cross. Overcoming resistance to the north of the city, the Americans attack uphill to Monte Cassino. At the same time, they occupy Caira, Monte Castellone, Cerro Belvedere, and Monte Abate. On the 3rd of February, complying with Hitler's orders, the German cut access to Rome from the south and gathered together all their available men, more than 90,000, for a large-scale counterattack. The first to be on the receiving end of this counterattack are the British divisions under General John Lucas, which retreat more than 5 kilometers in the north and establish new lines of defense on the River Moleta and the Mussolini Canal. Reinforcements arrive continually on both sides. The Allies have 100,000 men, and the Germans surrounding them have some 120,000. On the 5th of February, they are close to the summit of Monte Cassino, but the Germans have strengthened their positions and fight ferociously, stopping the advance. The high number of casualties suffered leads them to being substituted by Indian and New Zealand soldiers under Bernard Freyberg, a veteran of the war in Africa. Knowing that defensive posts have not been placed in the Abbey, Freyberg and General Francis Tucker of the 4th Indian Division urgently request air attacks against Cassino, Monte Cassino, and the surrounding area of the Liri Valley. All the Allied commanders support the action, though afterwards only Freyberg will be held responsible for it. On the 15th of February, 750 B-17, B-25, and B-26 planes of the U.S. Air Force dropped 2,500 tons of bombs in the area of Cassino. Some 500 tons fall on the Abbey. The monks and civilians that live there have been moved to General von Senger's barracks. Afterwards, the Allied artillery opens fire on the German positions for a number of hours. The action is condemned from the Vatican and throughout the world. The Germans used the rubble caused by the bombing to entrench themselves amid the ruins. and make their resistance more effective. A new attack on Cassino begins on the 16th of February. Indian troops manage to reach the summit, and there appear to be no German troops. However, minutes later, General Heydrich's paratroopers emerge from the ruins and attack them with all their offensive capacity, forcing them back. Heavy rain over a number of days has turned the ground into a quagmire. On both sides around Cassino, the men take a breather, and silence reigns, broken now and again by machine gun fire. The second attempt to take Monte Cassino has come up against a dead end. At the end of February, Hitler's troops tried to tighten the noose, but heavy Allied artillery fire and air attacks halt their advance. Suffering heavy casualties, they opt to detain their assault against the area of Anzio. Every day of battle ends in a massacre for each side. The Germans carry out one last desperate offensive, but come up against the U.S. 3rd Division and lose more than 3,000 men and 40 tanks. On the 1st of March, bad weather forces the troops on both sides to cease fire. They are too tired and hungry to fight on. In the middle of March, the weather improves and the aerial bombing of the area of Cassino resumes. 500 planes attack everything in their sights, dropping 1,400 tons of bombs. After them, 9,000 big guns open fire on the ruins and continue their barrage for a week. Once the air attacks and artillery action are concluded, the third offensive against Cassino gets underway from a number of positions, and the Allies occupy the ruined railway station on the 16th of March. But General von Sanger renews his attacks on the 23rd of March and again stops Freiberg's troops. General Alexander orders all frontal assaults to be put on hold. The Allied commanders are nervous. It is essential to cut the German supply lines in order to weaken their resistance. With this in mind, Operation Strangle sets in train a new series of bombing raids, this time from the Gustav Line to the Swiss frontier. Railway stations, tunnels, stores, railway lines, and roads are destroyed. But the Wehrmacht's capacity is enormous. The supplies continue to reach the army in the Italian peninsula, and the Cassino defenses are kept alive. Harold Alexander, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Italy, sends all the available bombers to the Anzio front. On the 3rd of March, the weather improves, and the Allied vehicles begin the fiercest attack of the campaign so far. A 1,000 planes, fighters, and bombers attack enemy strongpoints. German hopes of carrying out a new counteroffensive are destroyed. Kesselring is forced to change his strategy and go onto the defensive. On the 28th of March, on the Cisterna front, the American troops of the 3rd Division are replaced by the 34th Infantry, at the same time as 15,000 new soldiers are brought into the Anzio area. Now, 120,000 men are crowded together into a German circle of fire that they call a half-acre of hell. Around them, 135,000 soldiers of the Reich are entrenched in their positions, with orders to block their path north. During April, both sides fight on the defensive. The assaults on enemy lines become skirmishes, with a constant trickle of casualties. The troops besieged in the Anzio Circle of Fire come under constant bombardment from the Germans' huge gun called Leopold, better known as Anzio Annie, which rains shells down on the area to devastating effect. On the 5th of May, at the same time as Allied bombers are renewing their attacks on Ploesti and German refineries, General Lucien Truscott and his men break through the lines surrounding in the area of Cisterna and take the city. Churchill despairs. He puts pressure on Harold Alexander to take the casino area once and for all. Alexander organizes Operation Diadem, which begins on the 11th of May. The Allies launch a week-long, all-out attack against the Gustav Line and the Hitler Line. French soldiers take Montefaito and clear the way to Rome, while the British expand the crossings of the River Rapido. On the 18th, the Germans received the order to withdraw to Valmontone. The Americans begin their chase, but General Mark Clark orders Truscott to head for Rome. They must enter the capital before the British. The German High Command begins to lose interest in Italy, as they have irrefutable evidence that the Allies are preparing landings in northern Europe. The German divisions defending Monte Cassino, on their way to Valmontone, descend the northern slope and leave thousands of uncleared mines and booby traps hidden among the ruins. Their withdrawal enables a group of Polish soldiers from the Podolski Regiment to reach the summit of Monte Cassino where, among the abbey ruins, they find wounded men who have decided to surrender.
On May 25th, in the early hours of the morning, the long-awaited link-up of the Anzio troops with the divisions that have broken through the Gustav Line finally takes place. General Clark, determined to be the first to reach the Italian capital, has allowed a number of German units to escape. But his triumphal entry into the Eternal City on the 4th of June is pushed out of the limelight by the Normandy landings 2 days later. Rome rejoices the liberation with thousands of church bells ringing, including those of the Vatican, where Pius XII welcomes the Allied soldiers. Eugenio Maria Giovanni Pacelli was named Pope on March 2, 1939. Considered to be the Pope of Peace because of his previous attempts to avoid the war, he sent a message of peace to the world over the radio. He was convinced that diplomacy and dialogue could resolve international disputes. When this did not happen, his position was one of neutrality, though the destruction of Monte Cassino led to tension with the Allies. His charitable work did not prevent his receiving strong criticism during the conflict from those who considered him somewhat lukewarm and too accommodating. Recalling the errors of the war, I ask everyone to stay close to God. One year after Operation Tidal Wave, U.S. planes continue attacking Ploesti. From the 19th of August, they bomb the installations without let-up for 3 consecutive days. 4.5 million explosives make a permanent dent in the Romanian oil barrel and bleeds the Third Reich. Achieving this has cost 3,000 dead and 400 planes destroyed. At the start of September, the Red Army occupies the installations. The new front in the north of Europe has required the attention of Eisenhower and Montgomery. Harold Alexander sees his plans delayed due to the transfer of troops to France. The German divisions that Clark allowed to get away withdraw to the north of the country. The delays in the Allied advance give General Kesselring time to construct the Gothic Line, which extends over the steep Apennine Mountains, along the River Foglia in the east, and to the north of Pisa and Florence in the west. "16 divisions, entrenched for the last battle, await the Allied offensive, which begins with successive air attacks in an attempt to cut communications between the Gothic Line and German territory to a minimum. The Allied stranglehold makes it extremely risky for the Germans to move men and supplies. All such attempts have to be carried out at night. On the 14th of September, the eastern part of the German line comes under heavy attacks. The Allies break through and reach San Marino. In October, the battlefield remains quiet due to the lack of provisions on both sides. Meanwhile, the Allies concentrate on preparing the way to Ravenna. Kesselring, fearful of the enemy impetus, orders the breach in the eastern section of the Gothic line to be shored up by the preparation of a new protective strip, which is given the name of Genghis Khan. (1945). Harold Alexander's plan consists of two successive diversionary assaults on both sides of the line to force the German troops to vacate the central zone. This is to be followed by an intense offensive to break the back of German resistance in the direction of Bologna and on to the Po Valley. In March, American troops take up positions on the left flank of the Gothic line. On the 5th of April, the continual artillery shelling announces the start of the attack. In front of them is Mount Belvedere, defended by the Kesselring Machine Gun Battalion. The German veterans hold back the Americans with mortar and machine gun fire. But after 2 days of hard fighting, and despite the Germans receiving reinforcements from the center, Mount Belvedere falls into Allied hands on the 7th of April. On the 9th, the British 8th Army begins the second attack, hitting the Germans at the other end of the line. Shortly afterwards, they burst through the center, but are halted by bad weather. Nevertheless, they have broken the back of German resistance. 3 days later, German resistance begins to crumble, and the Allies take the heights surrounding the Po Plains. On the 18th of April, they take Bologna, and General Clark decides to advance to Parma. The road to the Alps is open. The Germans struggle to slip away, hoping to reach the River Po, which lies before them. Kesselring has been transferred to the Western Front, and General Vietinghoff requests Hitler's authorization to begin the withdrawal. It is refused, but Vietinghoff still gives the orders to withdraw, using the remaining serviceable roads and bridges after the heavy Allied bombing. The British and Americans continue the offensive by land with armored vehicles all along the Po Valley and take the cities of Padua, Venice, Verona, Treviso, and Trieste. The Germans abandon their heavy equipment and scatter. On the 25th of April, partisans take Milan, and 2 days later, capture Mussolini and his lover, Clara Petacci, near Lake Como. They refuse to hand them over to the Americans and execute them on the 28th, displaying their corpses next day on Milan's Loreto Square. The Americans reach the foothills of the Alps. The Gothic line is only a memory, and the withdrawal of German troops a reality. On the evening of April the 30th, the news of the death of Hitler leads to a complete collapse of morale among the German troops and commanders. The head of the Gestapo in Italy, Karl Wolff, substituting von Vietinghoff, offers the surrender of the German forces to General Alexander. On the 2nd of May, the unconditional surrender of the German forces in Italy is made official. Upon receiving news of the surrender, Churchill spoke of how belief in the justice of the cause and in ultimate victory had brought victory within reach.
Trusting to our Christian